Have you ever asked yourself why wars start in the first place? Now that's a question that can stir quite a debate. It's not as simple as black and white. There are countless factors at play: political, economic, ideological, you name it. And the results? Often devastating. Lives lost, families torn apart, nations in ruins. But it's not just about the physical destruction, it's also about the psychological scars that linger long after the dust has settled. Today, we dig deeper into one such conflict, the Ukraine-Russia war. To understand the present, one must often revisit the past. Rewind to the early days of the Ukraine-Russia war, a conflict that has since become a focal point in global politics. The initial tensions were rooted in a complex web of historical, political, and cultural factors. Ukraine, after all, was once part of the Soviet Union, and Russia has long considered it to be firmly within its sphere of influence. However, Ukraine's aspirations to align more closely with the West stoked the flames of discord. The escalation of conflict did not happen overnight. It was a pressure cooker, with the heat gradually increasing over time. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 was a major flashpoint, marking a stark shift from simmering tensions to open conflict. This move was widely condemned by the international community, but it sent a clear message. Russia was willing to flex its military muscle to maintain its grip on what it saw as its backyard. Meanwhile, on the home front, the war in Ukraine began to seep into the American political landscape. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' skeptical stance on the war, dismissing it as a mere territorial dispute, sparked heated debates. His comments caught the attention of his potential Republican rivals, prompting responses and even condemnation from some GOP lawmakers. This brought the spotlight onto President Joe Biden's support for Ukraine, raising the possibility that the war could become a major issue in the upcoming Republican primary race and the general election. The war also exposed a divide within the Republican Party itself, with hawks and establishment internationalists on one side and followers of the America First approach on the other. DeSantis' position drew support from Republicans in the tradition of Ronald Reagan, but also strained his relationship with former President Donald Trump, who saw him as a disloyal protege. The war in Ukraine, a seemingly distant conflict, had now become a divisive issue in domestic U.S. politics, which could impact battlefield strategy and international perceptions of U.S. commitment to Ukraine. It was no longer just about Ukraine and Russia, it was about America's role in the world, its alliances, and its values. And so began a conflict that would reverberate across the globe. As tensions rose, so did the stakes. The war in Ukraine was no longer a distant event but a focal point, pulling in major players from around the globe. The stakes were high, and the world watched as the events unfolded one by one, each turning a new chapter in this unfolding saga. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' skepticism about the war in Ukraine became a conversation starter, a statement that echoed across the political landscape. His dismissal of the war as a mere territorial dispute was met with a flurry of responses from potential Republican rivals and some GOP lawmakers. This unexpected turn of events brought renewed attention to President Joe Biden's support for Ukraine, raising the possibility that the war could become a major issue in the upcoming elections. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley rallied behind Biden's strategy. They emphasized the importance of U.S. involvement in Ukraine, a stance that didn't sit well with some conservative commentators and leaders. They accused the military establishment of involving the U.S. in foreign conflicts, further fueling the debate. This divide over Ukraine ran deep within the Republican Party. On one side were the hawks and establishment internationalists, on the other, followers of the America First approach. DeSantis' position on Ukraine drew support from Republicans in the tradition of Ronald Reagan. However, it also strained his relationship with Trump, who saw him as a disloyal protege. A drone incident between Russia and the U.S. added fuel to the fire, further escalating the controversy over the U.S. role in Ukraine. Both countries tried to avoid escalation, but the political reverberations reached Washington. Trump used the potential for direct U.S.-Russian clashes to argue that he was the only candidate who could prevent World War III. The war in Ukraine had become a divisive issue in domestic U.S. politics, impacting battlefield strategy and international perceptions of U.S. commitment to Ukraine. Other potential Republican candidates, such as Nikki Haley and Mike Pence, criticized DeSantis' stance and expressed support for Ukraine. These events sparked a wildfire of controversy and political discourse, not just within Ukraine and Russia, but across the world. The war was no longer just about Ukraine and Russia, but about the world's collective approach to conflict, sovereignty, and human rights. It was a test of global diplomacy and a stark reminder of the far-reaching implications of war. No war exists in isolation. This statement rings especially true as we examine the international response to the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. The reactions have been varied, spanning from outright condemnation to a more nuanced, cautious approach, reflecting the complexity of global politics and the far-reaching implications of this war. In the United States, the war has become a focal point of domestic politics, creating a political divide that is as profound as it is palpable. The stance on the war has become a litmus test for politicians, with potential impacts on the upcoming presidential race. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, for instance, has expressed skepticism about the conflict, dismissing it as a territorial dispute that isn't a core U.S. national interest. This stance has not only sparked responses from his potential Republican rivals, but also prompted condemnation from some GOP lawmakers. However, this divide isn't confined to party lines. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin have both defended the importance of U.S. involvement in Ukraine, emphasizing the need to uphold the rules-based international order. Their stance has come under fire from some conservative commentators, including former President Donald Trump, who have accused the military establishment of involving the U.S. in foreign conflicts. The ripple effects of this divide are far-reaching, shaping not just the domestic political landscape, but also international perceptions of U.S. commitment to Ukraine. It's a delicate balancing act, requiring a nuanced understanding of global politics and the potential repercussions of action, or inaction. Meanwhile, other major powers have also been drawn into the fray, each with their own perspectives and interests to protect. The international response to the conflict underscores the interconnectedness of our world, where a war in one region can have implications far beyond its borders. The reverberations of this conflict are being felt in every corner of the globe, in the halls of power and the streets of ordinary towns. As the world watches and waits, one thing is clear: no war exists in isolation, and the global impact of the Ukraine-Russia war will continue to unfold in ways we may not yet fully comprehend. So, what have we learned from this exploration? We've delved into the complex narrative surrounding the Ukraine-Russia war, highlighting the causes, major events, and global implications. The war has not only reshaped the geography, but also the political landscape, particularly in the United States. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' skepticism towards the conflict has stirred the pot within the Republican Party, drawing both support and criticism. His stance, dismissing the war as a mere territorial dispute, has sparked debates, setting the stage for the war to become a contentious issue in the upcoming 2024 presidential race. On the other side of the coin, we've seen President Joe Biden's resolve to support Ukraine, backed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Despite criticism from the right, they have stressed the importance of the U.S. involvement in Ukraine, upholding the rules-based international order. The war has also brought former President Donald Trump back into the spotlight. Using the potential for direct U.S.-Russian clashes, he's argued that he is the only candidate who can prevent World War III. This, however, is a contentious point, as his history of praising autocratic leaders raises concerns about the tone he sets for his party and supporters. In essence, the Ukraine-Russia conflict has seeped into domestic U.S. politics, creating a divide that could shape the battlefield strategy and international perceptions of U.S. commitment to Ukraine. As potential Republican candidates like Nikki Haley and Mike Pence express their support for Ukraine, the stage is set for a heated debate preceding the 2024 elections. As we continue to watch this conflict unfold, we are reminded of the intricate web of global politics and the far-reaching impact of war.